Is the Mac Mini any good? Is it worth $599? Is 8GB of RAM enough? And how long will it take me to fill 256GB hard drive space? Stick around as I hope to answer these questions for you with some realish world scenarios and some benchmark tests. Hi everyone, my name is Monty and welcome to InsideWire. First, let's jump straight in and have a look at the baseline test of the Mac Mini. So this has been idle, this is me just setting it up, and we'll have a quick look at the CPU. As you would come to expect, the CPU is idle at 99%. The memory is an interesting one with it already using 4.68GB of RAM, but do note I haven't installed anything on this and this is a vanilla OS. For our next test, we jump into Google Chrome where we open up 5-ish tabs running various different things such as YouTube, Netflix, Amazon and a few other pages. You can see the CPU is not really touched as you would expect it. However, we all know how memory hungry Chrome can be. So this has almost taken a gig worth of memory and that's just opening 5 or 6 tabs. Next is Office productivity. Now in some way, shape or form, someone always comes across Office at some point in their life, whether it will be the Microsoft platform or it is on the Apple version, which is Keynote, Pages and Numbers. Now I did say I'll run a real-ish world scenario, so I got a well-known AI tool to write me a quick macro, which basically fills in cells for 30 seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. Straight away, as you would expect, you see the CPU spike to 100%. And here is a quick look at the spreadsheet of what's been filled in. So it filled in approximately 10,000 cells. As for the memory, well, it didn't really touch the memory at all on that. So it was more of the processing power behind the CPU. For those that are more interested in the numbers, we move on to the Geekbench scores. So we ran a single core and multi-core test. The single core came in at 1,957 and the multi-core came in at 8,971. Interestingly though, while running the CPU test, the CPU didn't spike too much as you can probably see, and the memory was untouched as you would probably expect. We then move on to CineBench, which we also did some tests on there. For the CPU multi-core test, you can see the CPU is fully maxed out at 99%, 100%, so it's constantly hitting that maximum. And we get in a score at 8,686 points. Now you can see that puts it 6th in the chart. However, like I said, this is a $599 machine. You're not going to get the best of the CPUs out there. We know the M2 processor is powerful, and for the price and the processing power, and that puts it around mid-table, so I think it's pretty good. Next, we move on to the single core test, and this again is using about 12 to 13% of the CPU while it was running, so it's not very high. And in this instance, it puts it right at the top of the list. However, second in the list is the Intel 11th Gen processor. So not the latest and greatest, but it gives you an idea of how it stands up against Intel's last year's chips. For those that are interested in 3D modeling, I did run a Blender test. So this is their benchmarking tool. It runs 3 different scenes across 60 seconds to see how well that runs. You can see in the monster scene that the CPU spikes, and also there's a spike in the memory as well. So you can see that moving towards the yellow mark. I didn't actually capture how much that was, but I would imagine that's above 7GB. Moving on to the junk shop, you can see that actually the yellow mark is around 7.15GB, so it's using a decent amount of memory to do this. And then finally we move on to the classroom scene where it tries to render that, and the memory drops down completely and frees up 3.48GB. So very efficient in terms of how the memory is used within this, and it just drops it off as soon as it's done with it. As for the 256GB hard drive, we've had a lot of people say that it's now a single chip in there with it being 256GB, so you don't get as much throughput. As you can see with the speed test, we're getting about 1650 megabytes write speed and about 1500 read speed. Now for this, it's still fairly decent in terms of for the average user. However, the power user, you might find this a little bit slower than your necessary. I ran this same test on my MacBook Pro, which is the 2019 i9 version, and I get around about 3000 megabytes per second on both read and write. So it puts that into perspective. That second chip really comes in and helps with that as well. Possibly upgrading to 512GB of RAM puts that in there and increases the speed, so maybe you might get that little bit more from there. Next, back into the application testing, we go into Final Cut Pro, where I've just chucked in a bunch of B-roll, put some layers on there, add some text, a few color grading here and there, not the greatest, just to make sure it does something, and I ran an export. You can see while it was rendering, the CPU was fluctuating up and down, and then we go ahead and do the export. Once you run the export, you can see the memory jumps up to about 6.8GB of RAM, so it's using a fairly decent amount. This is a 4K export at 30 frames per second. and the CPU spikes a little bit, but it doesn't really impact it in terms of performance. Next, we went ahead and installed Windows 11 using Parallels. So if you don't know what Parallels is, it allows you to install Windows on top of your Mac OS system. So what I've done is gone ahead and installed that, and you can see this running in the background just here. I quickly opened up a web browser and just browsed the web to see how well it worked. The CPU, again, while it booted up, the CPU spiked ever so slightly, but in terms of running, the CPU stayed fairly flat, and the memory didn't really get touched that much. I mean, yes, we are up to almost 7 gig of RAM, but you are literally running 2 OSs on one computer. Unfortunately, I don't have Photoshop or Lightroom to demo for you to show you how it works in terms of photo exports or even rendering within there, and I probably couldn't even show you how to do that either, so probably a good thing I don't have them. The next thing I wanted to do is test this since the M1 Max came out last year, but I never actually got a chance to review one. So what I wanted to do is go into the Finder, go into the applications window and literally open up everything. So I went in there, hit a Command A and hit open, and it took approximately about 2 minutes for everything to open, give or take. You can see the memory at some point, it just spikes towards the red, and I think that's where it was opening more and more applications. You can see at the bottom how many of them are open, but that red just got towards the end, so we put it under a serious amount of pressure then. And the final test I wanted to run was running multiple tasks at once. So what I've done in this scenario is I've got Windows 11 open and Final Cut Pro. So we go ahead and render out a video from the one that we did earlier and try and do something within Windows. So you can see it's hovering around about 5 gig at the moment with the Windows application open. I go ahead and export the file, and then I go into Windows and just run a YouTube video. And you can see we're pushing it around 7.5 gig of RAM, and the CPU is probably running around about 50 odd %. Now, to be honest with you, you're running 2 OSs and exporting a 4K video. That's pretty impressive in terms of what this machine can do. You have to bear in mind that it is only a $600 machine. Well, was I wrong about the Mac Mini? Well, for sure to say it's definitely surpassed my expectations. There was a lot of mentions around the Mac Mini not being powerful enough, having the single drive, but you've seen some of the tests I've run. Now, if you think this is going to be powerful enough for a pro end user, you're absolutely wrong, because for $600, it's something that you would use to do your day-to-day activities. It's not going to be something for a pro user. Can you run single tasks? Photo editing, video editing, running another Windows OS? No problem at all. Drive space, 256 gig, yes, it probably is a little bit on the small side. However, you can always go ahead and upgrade that for $200, or most people are now using cloud storage nowadays anyway, so you can go ahead and put that up there. Once we moved on to the multitasking, yes, the machine did suffer a bit of a performance issue, but to be fair, when I was trying to do 3 different things at once, I would still say it's pretty impressive for the price. Now you can go ahead and do those upgrades as I mentioned. You can spend $200 upgrading the RAM to 16 gig, $200 to go ahead and add a bigger hard drive, but then you're going to be almost doubling the price of this unit. Something that I did find interesting though that I don't think a lot of people have mentioned is the fact of how quiet the fan is on this unit. I've been running this for a couple of days now and I haven't noticed the fan at all, and it doesn't really get that hot. So even when the CPU was at max and the RAM is maxing out, it didn't really get that warm. I hope you found this video useful. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of the Mac Mini. Do you think it's worth it for $599? Do you think you can get something better? For me, I think it's a good entrance into the Apple ecosystem and to run your day-to-day activities. If you're looking for something more intense, then we would be looking at the 14-inch MacBook Pro, which I have a video coming on soon. So do hit that subscribe button, and or you have a look at the Mac Studio, which is the bigger brother to the Mac Mini. If you want to see the link to this product, well, I'm sure you know where the Apple website is, but there's a link down below to my Amazon affiliate, and it does help me out also as well. For now, this is InsideWire, and I'll see you in the next one.